Hi there, here we are again in sunny Kent, and I'd like to talk about RAND, Ukraine, and the problem with winning. RAND, the strategy group, corporation, whatever, came out in 2019 with a report which was basically how to extend Russia, by which they mean how to overextend it, push it into a disadvantaged situation so that the US could win relatively against Russia. And we're going to look at some of the issues, or especially the issue of winning and the problems that it generates in this situation. Now, RAND, since people noticed this report, have come up with a header for their article, essentially saying that due to claims and Russian propaganda, we encourage you to read this article, but you should be aware of Russian propaganda in this matter, and for more on Russian propaganda, click here, or words to that effect. Well, I've no idea what the Russians were saying, but I know what I read in the report. And it is about examining all the spheres, political, economic, military, whatever they could apply, psychological, media, God knows what. Haven't read the full report, but even what I've read so far is pretty damning. Because the first measure that they highlight is economic sanctions, and we know full well what the West has been doing. But of course, the West is a white hat. You don't want to put sanctions on just because you're a bully. You have to have a reason. Well, another element of the report was they pointed out that you could arm Ukraine. And that, of course, is what the West was doing. And the point of this report is that it shows that this is not a shock to the West. And that touches on the whole issue of the hypocrisy in the media and its role. This was not a shock to the West. This was designed by the West. This was a recognized scenario. And it takes us right back to Project for New American Century, Robert Kagan, their report to take down the enemies of a certain Middle Eastern country, which sadly they couldn't implement absent a new Pearl Harbor. How fortuitous that less than a year after inauguration, they had 9/11, and all of a sudden they were off, and 20 years of war followed. That Robert Kagan, his wife Victoria Nuland, is central to the Ukraine story. So we have the same players, the same characters, and as ever, it's a case of we'll only start the film rolling once it suits us. We've done the thinking, we've done the strategizing, we know what we want to happen, but we can't get the ball rolling until the enemy does something, or is claimed to do something, or seems to do something that is sufficiently horrifying that we can sell it to the masses. So as I say, the whole strategy, problem, reaction, solution, it's all illustrated here yet again. And although that's all very interesting, I really want to talk about the issue of winning, because that's what struck me about this document. But let me just state for the record that any claim that this was a shock, a surprise, that the West had no idea that Russia would be so foolish, that Putin would lose his mind and invade Ukraine, total, utter lies. It was understood, it was designed, it was proposed as a strategy to get exactly this kind of reaction, so that the West would have the excuse to win. And it's winning the media war, it's winning the economic war in theory, or at least it's having the opportunity to impose sanctions. And it's if it's not winning the military war. It claims it's winning the military war, but it's having to pump a lot of arms and aid into Ukraine. But more importantly, the US posture is now clearly that we must win. We will win at any cost. Well, that's going to be a high cost for the ordinary people of the West. But as I say, what struck me was the issue of winning. It is framed as competition. Now, let me go back to 1990, 1991, the end of the Cold War. The West won. No more major wars. It was just going to be minor insurgencies until the neocons came up with an entirely new concept of an enemy. Middle Eastern terrorism, to take down the enemies of a certain country over there. But had they not done that, or setting that aside for the moment, let's just remind ourselves, the West had won. Soviet Union was collapsed. The US was the dominant world power. It won. Now, I may look at this in terms of football in a moment, but let's first perhaps start with something a little bit more violent, a little bit more pugilistic. So, we have a boxer. In my era, it was, Muhammad Ali, who appears to have been a very decent guy, just a very good boxer. But let me just borrow Ali, just for the sake of a name, for a moment, and let me put him in one of his championship fights, and he knocks out whoever his opponent is, I don't know, Fraser or someone. The bell goes, he's won. Bravo. What a magnificent man. What an extraordinary boxer. And then, I have no idea, I think it was Fraser, but let's call it Fraser. Fraser finally recovers consciousness. He gets up. He's staggering a bit. Definitely the worse for wear, but he's up. Ali is horrified. He hits him again. Everyone is astonished. How dare Fraser get up? Bravo, Ali, get him down, get him down. And the ref blows his whistle, and Ali pushes him aside. And Fraser sort of recovers and gets up and starts staggering around. This is unacceptable. Ali hits him again and gets him down again. The West had won. Why wasn't that enough? And this is where we come to competition. Because when you come to competition, as long as the other side exists, you're still in competition. Now, RAND notes that Russia has a remarkably powerful military for a budget of its size. And its budget is about the same as the British, or basically any second-tier nation, all about, $50, $60 billion, that sort of thing. The difference is, firstly, on the West, you've got America, and I've no idea what its budget is now. It's either 300 billion or 700 billion, I don't know. I seem to recall, its peacetime budget used to be about 300 billion, and its wartime budget, which of course is what we've been in for since World War II, I seem to recall about 700 billion. And of course, every time that peace broke out, strangely, a new conflict emerged, a new reason for fighting. And the neocons were just the latest in that. But the point is that the US dwarfs the Russian military budget. And if you look at the opponents, the other candidates, the second-tier nations, yes, you've got China, you've got India. But you've got a whole list of Western powers, UK, of course. So you start adding up all the different UK, even if you ignored America, and you start adding up all the UK countries in the West, in Europe, that are nominally capable of taking on Russia with a similar budget, you're now talking 3, 4, 5, 7 to 1. And there's a couple of points there. The whole media, oh my God, this is Russian expansionism. What kind of idiot would pick a fight at 7 to 1? Putin's not an idiot. He knows perfectly well that that's an absurd thing. But we go back to winning. He knew perfectly well that the West was going to respond. He knew perfectly well that it was not just responding, but it was initiating the NATO expansion eastward. And it had, for years, ignored its own promise not to expand. And so when the media talks about the shock, the aggression, the expansion, it completely misses the context of what is going on. And of course, you know, as the fact checkers would put it, your Facebook post is missing context. Well, why is it that the media have entirely managed to omit, they didn't just miss it, they aren't so incompetent as to miss it. The military planners aren't so incompetent to miss it. They omit deliberately all the context, all the precursors to the narrative. In other words, there is an intent to deceive the public, and the public, of course, soak it up. And the relevance of the RAND Corporation to this is that, if it's RAND Corporation or just RAND or whatever, is that it is the evidence, the smoking gun, so to speak, that they knew that this was not just that they knew, that this was actually a recommended strategy. And notice that by setting sanctions up as a key tool against Russia, it is a premeditated act of intent to harm. In other words, we may need an excuse because we want to sell it to the public, but they knew it was intended, it was in their pocket, it was, if we could do this, this would be wonderful. So the West, it wants its white hat. It waits until Putin responds. It then omits all the history, and it gets the war, the disadvantage, the political, the economic, the social media, and the military conflict that it has wanted all along. And that is the significance of this RAND report. But let's look at this aspect of winning. And let's go to I don't know, Super Bowl or FA Cup final. Biggest night of the year. Both teams coming out. And the ref blows his whistle. And one of the teams gets their phones out, starts chatting, taking selfies. People have paid thousands for a seat in the stadium to watch this titanic conflict. A stadium that is just the modern equivalent of the Roman amphitheatres. And here's this team chatting. Oh, I don't know what the other team does. Maybe they kick the ball, score a goal. But the fans start to get angry, confused, disappointed. What's going on here? Phone calls start to be made. People start jeering, throwing their popcorn at the television screen. Because this is a competition. This is about winning. They want to see the conflict, the blood on the ground. And this is why I say that this isn't football. This isn't cheer your side on. This is about war and the destruction of societies and the harm you're doing to the West and to Russia. And not just Russia at this point. They're already talking about taking on China, threatening India. It is an egomaniacal, megalomaniacal determination to win, because the US is the number one. We're the superpower. Don't you get it? bow down before us. And there's a whole video that, well, actually, they're already past their peak. And this may be their downfall, but for the moment, their determination to win is going to cost us all dear. And the key point is, there is no live and let live in the Super Bowl. There is no live and let live in a boxing tournament. There is no live and let live in a tennis tournament. We are raised on the idea of competition. Business is competition. Politics is competition. There is no live and let live. It is only win. And of course, if you're a sociopath, if you have no empathy, if winning is everything, and if you're raised into that kind of society, well, omitting the context, being fair about the facts, that would be stupid. We want to win. We need the people on our side. So how do we get the people on our side? In COVID, it was instill fear. The government admitted it. We could see it. We didn't need their admission, but it's, even they had to admit that was their goal. So when you win, you're allowed to do anything. And notice the rhetoric coming out of the American politicians. It's not about, oh dear, why did Russia do this? Let's examine this. Perhaps we had some responsibility in it. No, it's unprovoked aggression, mad Putin, and we're going to win at any cost. And people talk about the last Ukrainian, well, yeah, and then the last Pole. But the British are already there, SAS training them in how to use that Javelin anti-tank missiles. So we're now part of the war. We're not just supplying the warmongers, we're part of it. And America, Biden, he said, when you're over there, what was it, the 82nd Airborne? When you're over there, you'll see this. Maybe that was a little bit of his OAP brain getting off script. But there are people in America who already are calling for boots on the ground. Another Iraq, another Afghanistan, another Libya, another Syria. Even if I don't recall offhand, Syria wasn't quite it was proxy war rather than invasion. But the point is, there's no live and let live in the US neocon Western rhetoric. And what does that tell you? And I'll touch on the issue of when the wrong guys win and the relevance of technology perhaps in another video. But for now, I just like you to reflect on the fact that the obsession with winning, which is at the heart of Western society, which is at the heart of US strategic planning as demonstrated by the RAND report and by the statements of the politicians, is going to be devastating for the world.